Hello. Today's practical life lesson is in cooking safely with knives in the kitchen. So, just to review some of our cooking skills here, chefs need to master cutting and measuring skills and the basics of mixing and stovetop cooking. Here are the skills you will be practicing as you try the recipes. Cutting. Foods are cut before cooking so that they will look good and cook evenly. Place the food to be cut on a cutting board and use a knife that is a comfortable size for your hand. To hold the knife, place your hand on top of the handle and fit your fingers around the handle. The grip should be secure but relaxed. In your other hand, hold the item being cut. Keep your fingertips curled under to protect them from cuts. Here are some commonly used cutting terms you'll need to know. Chop, to cut into irregularly shaped pieces. I like that one because it's pretty easy. Dice, to cut into cubes of the same size. Mince, to chop very fine. Slice, to cut into uniform slices. Grating and shredding are also examples of cutting. Grate, to rub food across a grater's tiny punched holes to produce small or fine pieces of food. Hard cheeses and some vegetables are grated. Shred, to rub a food across a surface with medium to large holes or slits. Shredded foods look like strips. The cheese used for making pizza is always shredded. Now, the most important part when using a knife is safety, safety, safety. So, before using a knife, get an adult's permission before using any knife. Always pick up a knife by its handle, never by the blade. Pay attention to what you're doing. Cut away from the body and away from anyone near you. If someone gets too close, you need to tell them to give you some space. Use a sliding back and forth motion when slicing foods with a knife. Don't leave a knife near the edge of a table. It can easily be knocked off, or a small child may touch it. If the knife starts to fall, do not try to catch it. Big mistake. Just back up, step back, let the knife fall. Don't use knives to cut string or open cans or bottles. And don't use it as a screwdriver. It's not a screwdriver. Don't put a knife into a sink full of water. Instead, put it next to the sink to avoid cutting yourself. So if you are washing dishes in a sink of soapy water and you go to stick your hand in there, you don't want to be surprised by something sharp like a knife. So when you are washing knives, that also takes extra care and consideration. Now I have a few foods selected here to help us demonstrate and practice. And I chose these because they have a couple different attributes. So the first thing that we're going to start cutting here is just some cheese. Now when you're cutting cheese, you don't want to just mash soft things. This is true for all soft foods like breads and things like that. If you just mash it, it's not actually going to cut through very well, and you're going to end up with an icky mashed blob of a thing. So instead, this is where you're going to go back and forth. Now this type thing I can hold fairly well away so that I am not going to risk cutting my fingers. Now as I go through, I can cut my cheeses into cute, adorable little shapes like this. I could also choose to slice down the cheese. Now if I'm going to do something like this though, I want to keep my fingertips out of the way. So I'm not going to get my fingers in the way of the knife. So I can slice going this direction too. Now whenever I cut something and I get a nice flat surface, I like to put that face down because then it's going to be even more stable. Sometimes I'll use my tip of my finger on the back of a knife to push down. That's because in this kind of blade, it is flat on the back. Now the front of this kind of knife is called a serrated knife. You'll see how it has little sharp kind of teeth designs down there. And that is extremely useful for cutting things like a tomato, where it has sort of a hard outer layer, but then it's really soft on the inside. If I just try to smash this, I'm actually going to make a really big mess. So instead, I'll hold this and then I will go back and forth with nice, gentle, I'm barely pushing down on the knife. If I just try to mash it, mess. But when you cut nice and gently, back and forth, that's how you can end up with nice, delicate little slices. Now, another food that I have here are carrots. Now, carrots are something that are very stiff all the way through. So when I cut these, I kind of want to be careful because I could end up cutting it and it goes zinging off somewhere else. So I'm going to still slice back and forth because if I just mash down, that's usually what happens when you cause it to fling off into the rest of the kitchen. So I go back and forth, and if I get down to a tiny nubbin that's hard to hold on to, there's no point in trying to cut a tiny piece and then hurting your fingers. Now the last thing I have here is a small apple. You can use an apple corer. You can use a knife to actually cut the peel off. But one of the ways that I end up cutting apples up fairly frequently, I keep my fingers out of the way, and I'm going to start cutting not directly in the middle, but over just at the edge. When I cut down, again, I'm going to go back and forth, and now you'll see I haven't cut into the core. Remember I mentioned that if you cut a straight side, that's what I put down, and now it's much more sturdy, lots easier to hold on to. Now the second cut I make, I'm going to, again, avoid the core, and now I have a nice, neat corner to my edge. I rotate it once more around. Last one. And then I just have this funny little flip-flop, and then one more. Now, usually if I'm doing this, I might nibble a little on the ends, but this way I can make sure that all of my apple here has no pieces and parts of the core. So if I want to, I could continue to slice these, I could chop them, I could dice them. There are lots of things that I can do. And using really pretty little apples like this, you can start to make lovely little serving decorations. I love when you go to fancy restaurants where they have used their apples or tomatoes or whatever to turn them into sculptures. You can find apples that are turned into swans and all sorts of things like that. So this is just a basic introduction on using a knife safely. Make sure, as always, if you are using something sharp, hot, or in any way dangerous in the kitchen, that you have some adult supervision. So with that, I now have to go carefully wash my knife, and happy cooking!